Good morning. We're going to start right on time, and want to welcome you all. We didn't pay the Brockton High School principal, Susan Stekowitz. We didn't pay her to set up our session almost perfectly, but if you remember from her bullets, they had four key areas of emphasis. The last one was monitoring, and the second to last one was implement with fidelity. And of course, this session is about implementation and monitoring tools. And we have three very distinguished guests. So I'm pleased, as the moderator, Todd Flaherty, to introduce our guests. For some reason, we're picking up microphones from places other than here. So I don't know, it's a male voice, might be the good Lord himself up there, I'm not sure, but we'll get through. And the reason these things are mic'd up, so the rooms are mic'd up, is for actually not for sound and communication purposes, but for recording. Every session's recorded. So to that end, I'd like to introduce our distinguished guests and introduce them in the order that they will be presenting this morning. And of course, we know the overarching theme is high schools, and we know that this is about a lot of work and research and effort about comprehensive implementation of strategies that high schools may be unique, probably are, I do believe they are, that you can't improve a high school unless you put into play a multiple set of strategies. Joe Harris this morning was talking about silver bullets. They just don't work in high schools, and a lot of this research is based on the 8 elements work that's been done at the National High School Center. And if as you listen to Lindsay, you'll get to appreciate if you're not familiar with that, what that's all about. The first presenter is Lindsay Fryer, who is a research associate at the National High School Center at the American Institutes for Research in Washington. And she's going to be presenting on monitoring tools. Our second presenter is Donna Brown from the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, and she's a section chief for federal grants. And then our third presenter is Steve Underwood, who's a director of program monitoring at the Idaho Department of Education. So 3 really capable people, and I think this morning's session will be a real treat for you, and hopefully spark and give you some ideas for taking work back to your places of employment. And then the format will basically be each presenter is going to do a presentation of 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're going to have time at each table, about 10 minutes, for you to interact with one another in sort of some structured but informal ways of interacting, and then we'll go on to the next one. So this is about an hour and a half of talking at you, and hopefully you'll get to introduce one another and know each other by your first names, and maybe get each other's email addresses for further collaborative and collegial work. So without any further introductions, Lindsay Fryer.
Thank you very much, Todd, and I'm happy to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about a few tools that the National High School Center has developed, which will hopefully help you in planning and monitoring a lot of your high school improvements efforts that are going on in your schools currently. So the National High School developed the 8 elements of high school improvement in 2008, really as an effort to help schools break down, organize, and target their specific high school improvement efforts and goals into actionable steps. So the framework really allows states to map comprehensive and systemic efforts at the state, district, and school level in moving their high school improvement efforts forward. So you can see the 8 elements listed here. They are rigorous curriculum and instruction, assessment and accountability, teacher effectiveness and professional growth, student and family involvement, stakeholder engagement, effective leadership, organization and structure, and sustainability. Each of these 8 elements is broken down into smaller subcategories to help users really drill down into specific efforts they want to focus on and specific actions they want to take in order to address high school improvement. So you can see the organization of the elements here. We have the element as the overarching category on the top, being one of the 8 that I just mentioned to you. And then within these specific elements, there's areas of focus, which really get into more specific detailed topics about what each of the elements are focusing on. And then the areas of focus are comprised into indicators of effectiveness, which are specific characteristics or action steps that high schools should implement in order to move their high school improvement efforts forward. In 2009, about a year later, the High School Center developed the first version of a self-assessment tool, which I've actually passed out to you and which you have as a handout on your tables, in order to help users actually implement the 8 elements and figure out how to incorporate them into their high school improvement structures. And this is entitled A Coherent Approach to High School Improvement, a District and School Self-Assessment, which you all have a copy of. And the way that this assessment works is users rate themselves on the specific indicators within each element to determine how well they're implementing each and where high school improvement efforts should begin based off of this rating system. And again, the results allow users to see really where are we not implementing these specific action steps well, where can we improve, and what efforts should we begin. There's also a next steps portion of the tool which allows them to kind of organize which steps they want to move forward on in implementing the 8 elements.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we'll continue for the sake of time here. As I mentioned, we developed this first version of the tool, which you all have a copy of at your tables. And what we're looking at here is one page within this specific tool. So this is element 2, assessment and accountability. And on the left, you'll see the area of focus that we're looking at, multiple assessment strategies. And then within this specific area of focus, there's 2 indicators here, just as kind of a demonstration of how the tool works. So what users would do is determine, based off of working with different staff at their school, what evidence does your school or district have in implementing these indicators within your system. So you can choose from 3 categories: little or no evidence, some evidence, or substantial evidence to see where you're implementing your efforts bestly. So there's 2 indicators here. For the first one, I've chose substantial evidence for assessment systems are implemented across all content areas to identify student needs, to monitor student progress, and to inform instruction. And then for the second one, I chose some evidence. This is again arbitrary, so you would do this at your school or district. And then on the far right, you'll see an overall self-assessment category. And this is basically, you look at the indicators within each area of focus to determine how well you're implementing that area overall. So once you're finished with this assessment, you have a really good record of where implementation is within each of these indicators and where your efforts should begin. Where should you start to begin your school improvement work? And then the next steps portion of this tool allows for the planning to address those issues. So we have an area to write out potential policies or practices to address the gaps that you've identified, what resources you would need to do this work, as well as what staff or whom to involve in this work. And what I'm going to present today is actually an online version that the National High School developed 2 years later of this exact self-assessment tool. And the benefits of the online tool are that it really allows this process to be automated. So the users still rate themselves in terms of the evidence that they're displaying for each of the indicators. And then principal reports self-generate based off of the rating system to help users see a summary of how well they're implementing each indicator and how well they're implementing all the indicators overall. And then the other benefit of having the tool in an online format is you can save the self-assessment data as you work in it, and you have a login ID, so you can come back later to update existing rating systems that you've implemented into the tool, as well as show any progress that you've made in implementing your high school improvement efforts. So I'm going to demonstrate that tool for you right now, and you can see what it looks like. So this tool is publicly available on our website, betterhighschools.org. You can see the URL up at the top, but the tool is all over our website, so it's very easy to find. And what we're looking at here is the introductory page of the tool. So you see a list of the 8 elements, which I mentioned to you earlier, as well as a description of what each is. And then in order to get started, what first-time users do is click Start Assessment down here on the bottom, and an ID will be randomly generated for you, which the users will save, and this is what you would use to log back into the tool if you want to come back and complete it at a later date or change some of the information that you've input into the tool. And a nice feature that we've added as well is the ability to have your email ID sent to you in an email initially, because that National High School Center is not allowed to house any school or district data on our server. So the ID is what you will use to get back into the system once you've begun the assessment. Returning users here would just enter their specific ID. And what I'm going to demonstrate to you is a partially completed assessment so you can see how the assessment actually works, and then a fully completed assessment so you can see all the reporting features that are available. So I log in here with my ID. And we're brought to the main menu of the tool here. And there's a couple of specific features to note on this page. First, you'll notice that all the 8 elements are present in this table in the middle of the page. And you'll see that 2 are already complete, as I mentioned before. So what a user would do is if they want to go back and update their assessment that they've already completed, they can just simply click this link. And another feature is once you've finished the rating yourself on the indicators for each element, a report becomes available that self-generates based off of your ratings, and you can choose to view that at this time. And then in the far right column, you'll see a level of implementation. And this is basically a percentage of how well you're implementing the indicator overall, the element overall, based off of the ratings that you've put into the tool. So I'm going to choose here to update my assessment for the first element. And so on this page, what you're viewing is element 1, rigorous curriculum instruction, area of focus 1 of 3 for this specific element, alignment and coherence. You can see that highlighted in yellow on the screen. So what users would do, it's very simple, just come in and rate yourself on the evidence that your school or district is displaying in implementing these indicators. So you just simply click the bubble, and we recommend that someone who might complete this self-assessment is a person who has a broad knowledge of the high school improvement efforts that are going on in your school or district. So you just choose the evidence for each of these categories, and if you want a definition of what little or no evidence might mean, you can simply scroll your mouse over it, and one of these definitions become available for you for each of the categories. And then once you've finished the ratings for all of the indicators within a specific focus area, there's again that next step section down at the bottom where you can plan what next steps you want to take to address the areas of deficit that you find. So if you're looking at this assessment specifically, it seems that my school needs to focus more on implementing college and career ready standards and vertically aligning our standards and curriculum. So some of the things that we might do is adopt the Common Core standards to ensure college and career readiness within them, or perhaps hire a curriculum consultant to help us vertically align our curriculum. Once you've completed all the ratings on a page for a specific indicator, you can move on to the next focus area. And now we're looking at instructional strategies and supports for that same element 1 within this tool. Again, you'll go through and rate yourself on what evidence your school or district is displaying on implementing these indicators. And another thing I should note is that in order to move on in the tool, each indicator has to have a rating system chosen. So we recommend to users that if you're not sure of the evidence that your school or district displays in implementing any of these indicators, just choose little or no evidence, because you do have the option to go back at a later time and update this assessment based off of the improvements that you've made. So again, you identify the areas that need improvement, you fill out the next steps portion, and then continue on. And once you get to the final element, the final focus area within an element, you have the opportunity to do several different things. So you can log out and return to the main menu and perhaps complete the assessment at a later time, or you can generate a report that will basically aggregate these ratings and to show you what percentage you're implementing the element based off of your rating system. So that's what we're going to do now. So you also have the opportunity to personalize this report in case you want to share it with an external audience. So you can put in the name of your school, which will appear on the report, as well as the name of the person completing the tool in case you want to make sure not to mix up reports if you're sharing various ones with different audiences. So the report will then pop up, and if you want to print or save this report to your specific drive, you can select a format in which to export it. So I'm going to export this to a PDF file so that you can easily see the report. And this is what will pop up for this specific Element 1 rigorous curriculum instruction. So what we're looking at here, overall, we see that we're implementing the element at 57% based off of the ratings that you placed in the tool. And then what the report does a nice job of is breaking down the element into the specific areas that you chose, how you rated yourself to see where these percentages are coming from. So here we're looking at the first focus area, alignment and coherence. We're implementing that at 42%, and this 42% is generated by the ratings that we chose for each of the indicators, which you can see in this box right here. And then those next steps that you also added into your tool also generate into this report. So this is nice for you to have. You can save it and print it and share it with an external audience, and just a nice summary that you have of the high school improvement efforts that are going on in your school. And just quickly, I know we're short on time. I'm going to show you what it looks like when you finished all the elements and what other reporting features become available to you. So I log in with my unique ID. And again, this table will be formatted to show you can go back and update any of the elements you've already completed, view individual reports, and there's also that quick reference percentage of implementation of each of the indicators on the right. So on the bottom, you'll see 2 new reports have become available after we've completed the assessment for all of them. So we have the self-assessment full summary report here. And what this report does is basically takes a look at how well you're implementing the 8 elements overall. So we have first at the top a summary of the each of the 8 elements. So overall, in terms of all 8 elements, we're implementing them at a 49%. And then the report breaks down within which evidence categories you're implementing each of the 8 elements. So we have stakeholder engagement implemented at 17%. This group of elements implemented between 26 and 75% implementation, and then effective leadership is implemented at 90%. So this report is a nice summary at a quick glance to show you which areas might be notable to target. And then if you move down into the report, there's also summary element by element of how well you're implementing them. So it only focuses on the specific areas of focus within each element and shows you this implementation as well as next steps that you've chosen in order to move forward with this work. And then the other report that's available in this tool is a specific detailed full summary report. And as you can imagine, it has more detail than this report. It basically takes each of the individual element reports and places them into one format so you can print this at one time and have the information for all the 8 elements in one place. So this is what we're looking at. Again, we have the summary section right up front that shows you how well, at what percentage you're implementing each of the indicators and elements. And then moving down, element by element, we have how well we're implementing the element overall, how well we're implementing each focus area within the element, and then what rating systems you chose for the indicators to show you where that percentage of implementation comes from. So this is, again, kind of a one-stop shop where you can print this report out and have the information for all of the 8 elements in one place. And as we tell users, this is not a perfect gauge of your high school improvement efforts, but it's really a nice step that you can use initially to say, where should I begin my efforts? What's being implemented, what's not? And it just really takes an overwhelming amount of information and narrows it down into specific topics for you to focus on. So right now, what I'd like to have you all do is look at the paper and pencil version of this assessment that I provided. And I don't know how much time we have, but just kind of glance over the indicators. Okay. See if there's, we have about 10 minutes. See if there's any indicators that are particularly relevant to your state, district, or school, and then what policies or people you might use to kind of help address the issues of deficit that you find within the tool.
How many school district folks do we have in here? And then, show of hands, and then state, okay, so it's good. Why don't you take about 2 or 3 minutes, and if you have a question for Lindsay before we bring up the next speaker, we'll go around to the tables, and if you have a question about the instrument, so maybe you can kind of huddle for a second and figure out what those 1 or 2 things might be, and we'll just go by show of hands, go around the room. All right, we can start on this side of the room. Yes, sir. I think that'd be great if you could stand up and just maybe just to be heard.
Sure. For schools that have used this, who we've talked to, they do one initially before the beginning of the year to say where they think they should start initially, and then it's really up to the high school improvement team. So we talk about a process of high school improvement, specific people assigned to do this work, and we've had a lot of people meet at the end of each grading period to kind of do a check-in, at different points during the year. But it really is up to the high school improvement team to say, you do need to allow enough time for change to occur, and you should meet at regular intervals, but there's really no set time that we can say to you or dictate to you when this should be done. We just recommend that it's done regularly and perhaps at the end of each grading period, just allowing enough time for implementation to take hold. This self-assessment was developed to be fully operational at the school level. So we don't have specific evidence that we can put forward and say, this might work at your school, because it's very different from site to site. There is facilitated processes or technical assistance that is available if you have specific questions, and that's available on our website. And we have an email address it's highschoolimprovement@betterhighschools.org. So we can then work with teams to start developing this process more and thinking about what type of evidence because that's the most important part of this tool. But it really is, we just recommend people who have a broad knowledge of the high school improvement efforts that are going on, working with a team to collaborate and discuss different evidence that might be relevant to particular indicators. That's a great point. We've recommended actually in different processes is you have the paper and pencil version. So what some schools we've worked with has done is pass that out to teachers or whatever staff members they want to get their perception on, have them fill it out, and then meet together as a group, and then kind of looking at everyone's rating system, go online and then complete the online self-assessment. There's no way within the tool at this point to aggregate many different assessments together, but you can use the paper and pencil initially, kind of get an idea of where people are at, and then go forward with the online version to see how well perceptions match what the tool thinks. Absolutely. Any individual can go on and get their own ID. I think depending on what element you're working on, as you mentioned, some of the elements are more tied to student outcomes, and I would say that those outcomes might be measures of evidence of how well they're being implemented. So I would say, student achievement increasing being the overall goal of all these elements together, and we recommend them being used in a comprehensive manner. And some of the elements are more tailored to student achievement than others. So does that answer your question, or? Like the assessment and accountability section takes a lot, student achievement in terms of evidence into account a lot. So I think that being the overall goal, all of these elements working together would be towards increasing student achievement. But in thinking about the evidence of each one of the indicators, student achievement might not be the specific focus of certain indicators. Well, there is a lot of indicators. So you can go and do it in a piecemeal fashion. So start with the first element, do the self-assessment for that, and see if there's any specific ones tied to student achievement. I'd say, it really is school by school basis of what you want to focus on. So this kind of just gives you an initial glance at looking across the indicators overall, how well they're being implemented. I would say element 1 and 2 are very much tied to student achievement, but all of them are related, and because teacher effectiveness and effective leadership also ties into that. So if you think that they're overwhelming initially, I'd say take it element by element, see how well you're implementing those, and look at the indicators, and then see what the assessment says as in terms of where you should begin efforts, and that might make the process a little bit less overwhelming to you. I would say absolutely. Depending on how you want to use the tool. So some schools just want to get an initial unofficial glance of how well they're doing. Others really want to use this to develop very specific high school improvement plans. So the focus of the tool is the evidence that you display of the implementation of each of the indicators. So if one person has a different idea of what evidence might be, a third-party person can come in, examine the evidence on both spectrums, and then kind of determine that middle ground. So I would say absolutely, depending on how you want to use the tool. This tool specifically focused on high schools, and I am not at this point aware of one that that focuses on middle school specifically. However, within this tool, there are some transition indicators that you might want to focus on in the movement from middle school to high school. So there is some overlap, and I think a lot of the indicators do apply at the middle school level, but it's not now validated or research-based for at the middle school level. Just as a last point here, this is the slide that just shows you the resources of where you can get these tools. So we have our national high schools, betterhighschools.org, overall website initially, and then both tools, the paper and pencil version and the online version, the link is listed here. And the email that I mentioned is hsimprovement@betterhighschools.org. I think I said high school before, but if you'd like more information about this tool or technical assistance in implementing it, the email is hsimprovement@betterhighschools.org. And I'm also available after for any additional questions. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I think it's still morning, and you're going to tell me if my time runs out, right? Okay. Donna Brown from North Carolina. I will start by saying the good news is I did bring a handout. The bad news is it has a little line running through some of the copies. We typically run all our copies on recycled paper, which would have meant you would have had gobbledygook on the back of every page. So since I invested my quota toward putting it on new paper, I hated to run second copies. So apologies if you've got a little gray streak on yours somewhere. I did not opt to run copies of the PowerPoint. You'll see it's just some overarching thing about 12 slides. I wanted to give you some evidence of the work to take back with you. It does have actual names on it, but there's nothing incriminating in it. So I think it would be good for you to see some examples of the work and in helping you to make some decisions about how that might apply either to what you're doing for SIG support at the state or at the local level. I'll start by just sort of introducing where I am in the agency. My group is called Federal Program Monitoring and Support, and we actually provide oversight for most of the programs under the Elementary Secondary Education Act, ESEA. And I'm going second, so I hope I'm not stealing any of Steve's thunder. We talked briefly before, and I think we have a lot of the same information to share as far as the way we kind of align state to state. My group, the biggest program that we manage is Title I Part A, and we've been working with the SIG grants under 1003G before their magical transformation a couple of years ago under those final requirements. The group typically does cross-program monitoring for all the programs we monitor on a 3-year cycle, and then we have implemented something in the last 2 years called program quality reviews. It allows consultants to take a deeper dive face-to-face in a district or in a school to look at specific components of what we consider to be compliance requirements, but to see how those are really fleshing out into high-quality programs for kids, which is bottom line for all of us. So when we designed what we were going to do in our first year of SIG monitoring, we modeled it much after those program quality reviews. So we weren't just there doing a checklist of compliance requirements. SIG in and of itself requires you to look at some things more deeply, and so we kind of modeled it in that way. In 1011, which we now call Round 1 SIG, we had 18 local education agencies to apply on behalf of 24 schools, which means in some of those districts they had more than one school showing up on the persistently lowest achieving schools list. We ultimately allocated a little over $63 million. Now, North Carolina's share of that $4 billion you heard this morning was about $90 million. We did opt to do early on the 25% reservation to add to funds for a second round, and so that's why we only allocated that $63 million. The allocations, the allotments to the districts were for school allotments. Somewhere between the low end was around $980,000 up to $6 million for schools for the 3-year period. So some did actually get the full $6 million. We had 18 schools that were Tier 1, and we had 27 that were Tier 2, and that's just to give you some understanding of who actually applied from those lists. We had sufficient funds in round 1 to, in fact, fund every LEA that submitted an application that was of sufficient quality, and in round 1 they were. Most of the schools were pulled into Tier 1 and Tier 2 both based on performance, which was interesting, particularly in the case of our high schools. Folks that had a graduation rate over 60% and yet had performance, student proficiency rates less than 35% in some cases over a 3-year period. So telling a story of probably some much deeper issues. Just to think about the high schools in particular, since that was sort of the focus of the work over the next couple of days, there were 10 traditional high schools included, and there were 10 alternative learning programs. You can see we had very limited middle and elementary school participation in the SIG grants. That's out of 24. We did have a couple of charter schools to show up on the Tier 1 list in round 1, and they did not opt to apply. We have had a couple to apply in round 2. Of those 20 high schools and alternative learning programs, we had one closure. They actually started as transformation, and then their local board decided to implement closure model about November last fall. We had one restart model in a high school. We had 4 that opted for turnaround, and 14 are implementing transformation. One thing that has been exciting about the SIG grants under these final requirements is this opportunity to serve schools outside of what you would consider to be Title I schools. As I talk to other states, I think it's similar. North Carolina historically has focused their Title I dollars on early childhood intervention, and so by and large, high school programs have not been served. And although our alternative programs often rise up to that 75% threshold when you'd be required to serve them with Title I, a lot of them have demonstrated that comparability and tried to skip those schools. So this is the first time we've been able to provide some significant resources in schools that we knew were underperforming, but just didn't have an opportunity to get there because locally they didn't decide to serve them. When we first came up with our Tier 1 and Tier 2 lists, and we were working with the U.S. Department of Education, the mindset was we automatically left off the charter schools and the alternatives. Many of our alternative schools have less than 100 kids for a student population, and we were thinking those smaller numbers probably wouldn't count. And after several times of saying, are you sure we have to include the alternative schools? The response was, if North Carolina is having that big a problem with their alternative schools, they may need to revisit their alternative school programs in their state. This has given us an opportunity to do that. We have a state requirement that every school district has an alternative learning program. It is an unfunded mandate. So this, again, allows us an opportunity to focus some attention on some underperforming, underserved schools. When we started with our SIG applications in round 1, we developed a rubric that had as little wiggle room as possible. We try to do very little with federal dollars that's not defensible, and when you have things that are subjective, like score ranges between 10 and 20, and one rater decides I'm going to give them an 11 because of this, and the other one says 18 because of that, it makes it a little hard to justify later on. And so what we opted with, we developed it under the 5 required areas, and we had a 4-scale rating system that aligns to everything else that we do in our state as far as self-assessments for after-school learning programs or comprehensive needs assessments that are conducted for schools. All of these use the same rating, the rating language. There was a 50-point possible, and the best score being, the exemplar would be if you were leading and then you got 10 points. So if you get 10 points in all 5, you would have scored a 50. We were required to say in our state application to USED that anyone who scored a 0 in any area would not be funded. In round 1, we did not have any zeros. And as you know, there is a strong focus all the way, beginning from the review period of the application all the way through to the implementation on capacity, capacity, capacity. And so what we were looking for in those applications initially was a demonstration, a commitment on the part of the district that they would, in fact, be able to support these schools and the models they were choosing to implement. What we are looking for then ultimately when we conduct our monitoring reviews is to see, in fact, if there is capacity to support that implementation plan, if there is capacity sufficient to make progress toward those key indicators, as well as the measurable goals and objectives that each one of those districts set for those schools. I'll tell you in a minute sort of the final thoughts as we reflect on, because we are closing out our first year of monitoring even as we speak. I went on 2 site visits last week myself. The schools have been monitored on a quarterly basis. Much like our program quality reviews, it's a less formal process. It's not like the superintendent gets a letter, the team is coming, and you have a closeout report. This is more of a sort of massaging the relationships. We have identified a point person in each school district. In some cases, it's an associate sup or a sup, and sometimes it's the person they call their SIG project manager or SIG coordinator. We work through that person to schedule these quarterly visits. We start with something called an orientation visit, and I'll give you an opportunity to look at some of the results of that when we break at the end of just a little brief presentation. We do use a specific protocol, and I've given you a copy of that. It is aligned to the one that the United States Department is using now to do their SIG monitoring of states. I do not know how North Carolina got out of the first round of SIG monitoring, because we've been monitored 3 times for Title I in the last 5 years. So we were not on round 1 yet, so I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it is very well aligned to the protocol they're using. The work that we do is coordinated through regional roundtable structure, with direct services being provided by DPI through another division called District and School Transformation. They were District and School Transformation in our state before the word transformation showed up under SIG. So we've had to work to clean up all the language there and make sure we're all on the same page. But this regional roundtable structure is a part of our statewide system of support that was already in place, and so we're using that same structure to help us coordinate our efforts across the agency for the SIG grants as well. And I may add now, it's probably important to know too, for North Carolina, we are also Race to the Top state. There is some similar language in there. It's sort of like the good news and the bad news. One of the things that has probably been a challenge for us is it has in some part placed competing initiatives in districts that are implementing SIG grants, and I could speak to that more independently later. Site visit 1 was basically to review the protocol. There are specific staff that are interviewed each time we come, and we do tell them up front what this process will be. Here's our instrument. This is what we're going to do in visit 1, visit 2, visit 3. The 2 visits for the 4th review that was conducted, the final last week, the schools knew that we wanted to talk to parents, so they already had parents ready to come into the school at a specific time so that we could talk to them about their school as well. There are informal classroom observations. They're pretty brief. And we are looking to develop a plan of technical assistance and support. We love our semantics in education, and so technical assistance might sound like support, but in North Carolina, it's not exactly the same thing. The second visit, each one of these visits, the principal and whomever else in that district needs to hear the results of the monitoring visits, gets a report out about what we're seeing. And those monitoring instruments are focusing on the fidelity of implementation of the model. So we did develop a monitoring instrument or a protocol specific for restart, for example. We do have one of those, turnaround and transformation, because some of the components are different. By the third quarter, we are looking at talking to some parents, and each time we try to meet with key staff. I'll speak to that in a minute when I talk about challenges. And then the last site visit is the final report. And I am very fortunate to have a staff person in North Carolina he's called my SIG coordinator, and I actually had to take away all of his other Title I responsibilities so he could focus his attention full-time on this. And I'm going to give kudos to George Hancock. He actually developed these instruments, and they were sent out on the CCSSO website very early on. He's done a lot of lead work toward helping us to get this effort in place in a way that really supports schools this year. So just publicly, thanks to George. Ultimately, when I did these 2 visits with him last week, he came up with 6 bulleted points, no more. One may have had 5. And he's basically saying, here are the 6 things that you're going to have to address in your renewal before we let those funds go July 1. And it is not a gotcha thing. We've been there to support them all along the way, and in fact, we have 2 contract staff who's going to work specifically with them to do the renewal process to make sure we're addressing these key areas. The renewal of funds, this is just the standard. I think the important part here is how we use our monitoring to provide feedback to help them to develop their renewal proposals. And I think I have the 2 minutes. I just wanted to reflect on, first of all, the good news is we have some really high flyers out there. It's been incredible. Some of our school districts, in fact, use turnaround to do some things locally that would never have been supported in their community otherwise. Things that had to do with personnel. That's a very sensitive issue, and local school boards have a vested interest in personnel, whether that's a part of policy or not. That's the real truth of it, and we have seen some people take some brave moves and some schools really making some extraordinary progress. Some of the challenges for consideration, the competing initiatives, and that is kind of what the lady was speaking to about in the school district, how you have to focus, focus, focus. She said, if they say make 6 objectives, I'm going to just write my 2 over 3 times. There are lots of competing initiatives, and it has been a stretch in some districts to get them to figure out what they're going to let go of if they take on something else, because there are no more people, and even though there's more money, sometimes there still are no more people that can do this work. And so we've had to work with some of those folks when they're challenged to figure out what they're going to let go of. Another challenge in some of these places has been undermining the culture of failure, I guess I'll call it. And culture change is hard. It's probably the hardest work that we do. And so that's probably been one of the greatest challenges in the areas that we feel like are still having difficulty getting their model off the ground. And yes, we are a year into implementation. Communication and consistency in staff is related. The 2 districts I visited last year did not have 1 person working on the SIG grant that started working on that grant in the planning and development when the project was originally proposed. So every time you got new folks coming in your district, you got to figure out a way to bring everybody up to speed. That's one of the things we've asked some districts to describe in their proposal is what will be their ongoing communication plan, because that's been particularly challenging at the local level. And the last piece is sustainability. I sat in on one session where the school principal was talking about the needs for the next year, and the needs were about personnel, like new personnel. And we had to constantly keep going back and saying, yes, but how will that be sustained 2 years from now when there's no more SIG funding for the school? So the sustainability is a challenge. North Carolina, just like the rest of the country, is deep in economic crisis. There are no local dollars anymore. They're talking about cutting our state budget another 8 to 10%, depending on which part of the General Assembly you're looking at. So that will continue to be a challenge, and we are working with the schools to help figure out ways to support that going forward. Did I overshoot?
No.
Yeah. what you have at your table, because I saw you flipping through when I said something about the first couple of sheets you have is the actual feedback from the school orientation visits. And what I thought was important about you seeing this is we were identifying early on, tell us what you need. If we've got anybody in our agency that can help support this, if we've got anybody in our state partnership network, if we've got anybody in the technical assistance centers that can help, we will help reach out for you, and we will help facilitate getting those people to your school. So I just thought it was important to see the notes of who was meeting. We were identifying very early on who was going to be responsible. The other pieces that you see are the monitoring instruments. You also see some pieces that sort of do the drill down, what we're asking parents, what we're asking teachers. So what you may want to do in your group for the next few minutes is to look through these instruments and then talk with the folks at your table about how this could be utilized at the state or the local level. I will say as a final word, we feel like what we do at the state level is modeling. I was a third grade teacher 16 years, so once a teacher, always a teacher, and I feel like it's our responsibility to model good practice for districts. And we have a conversation about my job, your job. You know, you are the counterparts locally to what we do at the state level. So what we do in our monitoring, we hope will be a model for what districts can do for monitoring their schools. So depending on your level, you might have a different take on it. Yes. Yes, George is one. So he being the SIG person, he did have some responsibility for direct monitoring, which was important in helping us refine our tools, because until you do it, you don't really know what you might need to change. We did contract with two high flyers. One was a former state associate superintendent for the department. The other one actually worked on the SIG grants at the U.S. Department of Education. When you see the McGrady name, that is Bill McGrady. If any of you were state people and worked with Bill on your SIG grant, he was formerly my role in North Carolina. And he's back in North Carolina now, retired from the U.S. Department of Education, and we grabbed him up as quickly as possible. So we do use some of our SIG admin funds to contract for additional staff as needed. We do in some schools. The division that's called District and School Transformation does a needs assessment at the beginning of each year, and they do differentiated support across the state. So we have some districts that have been identified for additional on-the-ground, everyday bodies in the building support, and then we have some schools within districts that aren't getting that full level of support, but the school itself may have one of those coaches assigned to the school for the year. We have worked with that division to ensure that support is coordinated for SIG when there are already bodies in the building. Where there have been gaps, my part of the division has provided that. We are perceived to be monitoring and technical assistance, and they are perceived to be support. That's why I said it's just a semantics thing within our agency, but we're really all working together for the same end. They use our feedback from the monitoring visits to figure out what they need to focus next on at the school level and vice versa. I can do this any way we need to. We do monitor the finances as well. We have a small group within our agency that's actually housed in the finance department that are, I think they're called Federal Program Compliance and Monitoring, which is almost like our name, but they just do the fiscal piece, and that means they can do fiscal audits from the perspective of supplement, supplant, appropriate expenditures. They also have an auditor who can do some auditing if needed. So there is that, and we just send them out on an as-need basis. Other than that, George is sort of the point person. We do monitor the expenditures. If you had a $1.8 million grant in the first year of implementation and you've only spent $300,000, we see that as a problem. So we do monitor that sort of from that level.
We're going to move. Might have a little time at the end if you have further questions on either the first two presentations, but I want to move to Steve Underwood and from the Idaho Department of Education, and then we'll have a little small group session at the end of that presentation as well, and go from there.
Good morning, everyone. Let's see if I can pull up my slides here.
I like it when a presenter comes up and they've got they're backing down from 20 minutes right there.
Try to be conscientious of that. Well, I'm glad to be here with you today. I wanted to begin by telling you a little bit about our state and our context, because what I find is I'm from Idaho, and we often get confused with Ohio and Iowa. And in fact, in our first Race to the Top application, one of the reviewers commented back about how Ohio needed to change X, Y, and Z. To which I thought, okay, I'll go tell the Ohio Department of Education, to do that right away. So anyways, I say that because we're a very rural state. And with that in mind, we're often having to translate urban research about school improvement into rural practice. And so a lot of what you'll see today is actually based in large-scale urban settings, but it's been modified for our context. So what I would ask you to do today is to be thinking about how to translate our rural practices to whatever your context is, whether that's urban or rural. So with that in mind, a few demographics so you can decide for yourself if this is applicable. We're a very large state, 14th actually in landmass, but we're 39th in population. We only have 1.6 million people. So our entire state is smaller than probably the number of students in the Chicago public school system. So with that in mind, it presents some interesting dynamics in terms of how we as a state monitor practice. So what I would imagine is some of the things that I have to say will probably apply to some large districts in terms of what we as a state do. Similarly, we're actually very remote. So we have ourselves, we find ourselves having to go to places that often require overnight, distances and so forth, and to develop those personal, interpersonal contacts with folks, which again, even though it's rural and remote, I think it's the same. I listened to the second school that talked this morning about the community links, and it's the same theory of action. It's based on that interpersonal connection. There's all those things that are involved with school improvement practices. So anyways, some of the other things just contextually, our average school district is 2,200 students, but our median is 620. Most of our school districts are less than 600 students, and so we even have some as small as 4. And with that, we had 13 schools that were eligible for SIG, and in the first round, we funded 6. In 4 of those cases, the school is either equal to the entire district, or it makes up a third or half of the district. So again, interesting things to think about. What we find is that the majority of our work relates to district improvement. And that's true regardless of whether it's the 600 school district or the 10,000 school district. And so we find ourselves coming from a framework or a theory of action where we say we want to focus on district systems to support schools. And if the case is that the school is the anomaly from the district, we'll deal with that. But we really think about the conversation in terms of that large scale. Some other things that I think are pertinent to the conversation are that we had pretty aggressive increases in our AYP targets right from the beginning. So in 2007, we had 73% of our districts in improvement and corrective action, and that's actually declined in the past couple years to 60%. And we think that a lot of that decline has to do with our focus on building human capacity, building human capital, human resources through a building capacity initiative. And so with that in mind, a couple things that you have in your handouts. I brought a list of resources that are going to be the documents that I referenced today, and you'll see that most of them are free and available through like the National Center on Innovation and Improvement and other places. There's one in there that costs a little bit, but they're all very reasonable, very doable. And so my thinking in the presentation is, yes, I'm a state person, but I'm hoping to give you tools and resources that will be applicable whether you're state or LEA or school. So with that, we'll jump in. So I've mentioned theory of action a couple times. Our theory of action is really based on Elmore's idea of the instructional core. You don't change performance without changing the instructional core, and the relationship of the student and teacher in the presence of good, high-quality content and instruction needs to be at the center of efforts to improve performance. And if you don't see it in the classroom, it's not there, right? And so with that in mind, we think, I'm at the state level, that's a couple peels of the onion or a couple layers of the onion away. So how do we leverage our resources and our processes to make sure that all the pieces in the system are working together to get down to the instructional core? So that's the framework from which I come, and you'll see that the things that I talk about, when I hear the word monitoring, I always think of compliance. And when I think of compliance, I think of the term compliance is necessary, but it's not sufficient. It's not going to get the job done. We can have compliant programs that still are low performing, to be quite frank. And so our state's primary goal in monitoring is not compliance, but effectiveness. That's why I titled this Pursue Effectiveness and then embed monitoring as needed, because that's what you'll see that we do. And so that's my encouragement to both states and districts that are in the audience. And so as we go forward, I'm going to talk to you about our system and our method. And I'm not going to talk in depth about the tools, because hopefully you'll be able to see the connections between the tools. And all the tools are available to you in various ways. As I also thinking about some of the questions that you all asked. You asked excellent questions. And time again, I kind of kept hearing the idea of culture. Really, the job of school improvement, yes, is the outcome of the students, but really you have to reculture these schools in order to get to the point where you can have sustained improvement. So with that in mind, our technical assistance programs really strike a balance between assistance and monitoring. Typically, our TA or support programs are voluntary, and much of the work gets done off the record. But despite that, what we realized is that many of our SIG sites, most of the PLA Tier 1, Tier 2, never accessed outside resources. They never accessed these TA projects before. So what we did is we instilled in our SIG process to say, okay, you have to do these things that are part of the final requirements, but you also need to play. You need to play in the sandbox and access these outside resources, outside programs. And so what we've done is we've partnered those schools and their districts with the programs that we provide to try to tie the pieces together. And with that in mind, the work of and response to that TA project then becomes information in the larger puzzle of compliance monitoring. So these are a couple of the different pieces we use, and I'll talk about each one separately. But we use an instructional core focus visit, a modification of our largest scale program called the Idaho Building Capacity Project. We use quarterly visits and interviews. We use we review their improvement planning process through an online planning tool, and then we also review the other data like the metrics and so forth in SIG. So the first thing that I think is going to be a great resource for any of you, for that matter, is based on the patterns of practice. It was originally designed by CII, the Center on Innovation and Improvement, and I think it was designed in response to the DC school systems as a way to identify their low-performing schools and shut them down. But what we did is we said, okay, we partnered with Sam Redding and said, okay, how can we use this? Because this booklet is tied directly back to indicators in our planning tool, Industar, which I'll reference here in a minute. And so what we're able to do is we basically go in, we take a team, because a couple people mentioned that whole idea of third-party validation, and that sometimes schools and districts aren't the best at self-assessing themselves, right? So we expect them to self-assess, but then we go in, use this as a state team, and we say, okay, we're going to observe 100% of your teachers. We're going to interview at least 60% of them. We're going to interview all the administrative team. We're going to interview your district leadership, and we're going to tie the pieces together using quantitative and qualitative data to say, okay, this is what we see in relation to the indicators in our tool. And it's not all the indicators, it's kind of those high impact ones. And then we provide a report back and say, this is what we see. So for example, one of our schools that's not a SIG school just had one of these focus visits, and the middle school thought that they were just doing great things. It was great plan, whatever, and we went in and we're like, great plan, we don't see it evidenced in any way in your practice, in your classrooms. Keep moving forward, but it's not there yet. So this is a process that we use to balance out that idea of where they see themselves, because oftentimes they can become, what's that word, myopic, right? They only see what their own practice is. This helps them to say, okay, external view, and here's the data, and then it connects to what I'll come to later, our planning tool, the Industar product out of CII. So that's one piece of our system. And the other piece that I referenced already a little bit is our flagship, that's probably the best way I can put it, our flagship support program in the state is the Idaho Building Capacity Project. And I don't see in your handouts, there's a little coaching guide picture that's a reference. What we do is we use highly distinguished educators, retired folks that really, what you could call them is improvement coaches, and they're assigned to a district leader and leadership team, and they're assigned to a building leader and leadership team to build capacity at those local levels around improvement. And so what they do is they go in over the course of 3 years, it's scaffolded, it's like 8 hours a week the first year, to 8 hours every 2 weeks the second year, to 8 hours a month the third year, scaffolds out so that ultimately they work themselves out of a job. And from that, again, that's our emphasis on building human capital, building the people that are there so that they can then continue the improvement project after all this is said and done, right? And so what we do is, as part of that, these improvement coaches at the district and building levels give us monthly reports back to what they're working on. And so we're going to, normally those are kind of, again, off the record. We don't care. We don't want to know necessarily everything that they're working on every month. But for the sake of SIG, since these schools have never accessed these types of things before, what we said is, okay, in your case, these are going to become public record. We're going to use them as part of our monitoring process to, again, tie the pieces together to say, you know, this is what your plan was, here's the focus visit, here's what you say your improvement coach is working on, how do those pieces tie together? On-site interviews is another part of our monitoring program, and this is where we do this based on actual staff that we have. So our staff will call or do on-site visits or whatever we need to do, and we've developed some questions that basically turn the requirements of the SIG transformation model, since that's what everybody chose, transform those into questions and just are going to walk through where do you stand? You said you'd do this in your plan. Where do you stand in terms of this? And then kind of use that as to say, okay, how are you progressing? Again, you can probably see that throughout our process, we're trying to really balance and triangulate data. We want to see that qualitative look, and we want to see the quantitative look. We want to put them together, and we want the schools to be thinking about those types of things as well. And then also part of the reason that we interview the district folks goes back to that theory of action. You know, a lot of times it's actually a district issue, and so we want to make sure that we tease those things out and support them along the way. One of the most powerful things that we've done as a state in the past, probably, I guess it's been 3 years now, we used to have this old improvement planning tool that we designed ourselves, and people hated it, and we got about what we put into it, right? It was somebody sat in a dark closet somewhere and typed it on the night before it was due and met compliance. What we found is that with the Center on Innovation Improvement, they've done all the work for us. They've distilled, kind of like the tool that Lindsay was talking about, they've distilled high leverage practices down to indicators of performance and put those into a tool that basically, it's online, it leads them through, it's supposed to be on a team, they have to identify their teams and so forth, leads them to outline goals, outline tasks, timelines, and then as an automated process for self-monitoring those components. Things will pop up and say, okay, did you accomplish your objective? If so, what's the evidence? And they have to put all that in this tool, and then we as a state have access to, because it has tiered permission levels, where we can go in and use that, and it becomes a continuous process. They're continuously updating it. We can see time, date stamps of every time they've gotten in and so forth. And what we found was when we moved to this tool, our first year was voluntary. We transitioned to it and we said, okay, you know, you districts and schools, you can use the old system or you can use the new one. And we had some volunteer to move in. But what we saw was that word spread like wildfire, that people that weren't even required to do improvement plans ended up doing it anyways because they heard their neighbors down, you know, a couple miles were using this and liked it. So this part, again, we've gotten a lot of mileage out of it. And so what we've said is, okay, we're going to just embed that into our monitoring practices because, again, it's just one more data point. A few other things that we use in terms of our monitoring and helping support that high implementation. You know, student achievement data, yeah. The issue with that is it's always a lagging indicator, right? It's the autopsy. So some of the type of student achievement data that we can use along the way is we can have conversations around things like, you know, do you have end of course assessments? If so, how are you doing on them? Are those changing? Formative assessments and so forth. But one of the other powerful pieces that we've implemented in some of our, particularly our IBC, our Idaho Building Capacity Schools, is a survey called the Educational Effectiveness Survey, which is by the Center for Educational Effectiveness. And that was, somebody asked a question about teachers and their perceptions and how they see and what evidence they have. This really is that. It's not your typical organizational trust survey. It centers around things like, I plan my lessons based on standards, okay, rating scale. My colleagues plan based on standards, right? And then you get data reports that tie those pieces together to say, okay, I say this about myself, I say this about my colleagues, okay, now let's talk about it and let's base it in the other validity of the data that we've collected to say, okay, how are those measuring up? So that's another powerful tool that if you're interested, it's worth checking out. And then, of course, yeah, we also do the things about the SIG reporting metrics, and somebody was asking about finances and things like that. So we do monitor those ourselves in terms of as the requests come in, the person works directly with me to say, is that approvable or is that not? So, in summary, our theory of action basically is that compliance is a minimum. Again, it's necessary but not sufficient. We work on building capacity. That is our primary goal because that is the only way you're going to get and sustain improvement at scale. And then we leverage our monitoring requirements as needed. If we're not seeing effective practice, what we do is we go back and we say, okay, here's a compliance requirement. You need to do something, all right? And leverage compliance to further that conversation if people aren't willing to go there themselves already. And then if that doesn't work, then we go to the next level and say, okay, if we don't see effectiveness and we don't see compliance, now we talk as a state leadership team about whether we're going to continue funding or not. So with that in mind, that's what I have to share. So thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. Yeah. So, I'll let you do it.
We're gonna. We have just about 10 minutes, so we're right on schedule. I got in trouble. Typical. We need you to use the microphone to ask the questions so they record. Again, you can hear one another. Actually, my view of that was by the time people walk to the microphone, we will have had 1/3 fewer questions because of the time constraint. So anyways, but if you can walk to the microphone, CC's got the microphone, and but any questions of Steve?
Steve, to use that C2 WISE tool, do you need to be in Idaho school, or can you go on and see what all that has to offer if you're from a
Excellent
different state?
question. It's free to anyone in the nation because it was developed under a federal grant through Center on Innovation and Improvement, which is a national center like the high school center. And so generally states adopt it, but in a state where your state hasn't adopted it, districts and schools can contact them and ask for access. I did put a sample login in there that for our school level and our district level, and you're all welcome to get in there and tinker with it as much as you want. You can't do any damage. You'll see, I think you might see like Elvis and other team members in there, so feel free.
Gayline, Texas. I noticed you talked about this tool for teachers where you actually have them talk about their lesson plans, and this is what they did in their lesson plans. They planned their lesson plans this way. Their colleagues, where is that in your handout? Is that something you developed in Idaho, or is it something?
Good question. I think it's on the last page. It says the Center for Educational Effectiveness. Our school improvement framework is based on Washington State's 9 characteristics of high-performing schools. CEE, the Center for Educational Effectiveness, is based in Washington, and all of their stuff is mapped backward onto those 9 characteristics. And even the Danielson framework, you can correlate them either way. And then it's validated through a major process that they went through in Washington through thousands and thousands of folks. And with that, it's really a survey. It's a perceptual survey that is tied directly to perceptions about effective practice. It's a very, very good tool.
And when they do the survey, is the feedback immediate? Do they get it themselves? How's the feedback given from this survey?
That depends from place to place. So like in our system, what we do is we have it, it takes about a week or 2 to get it back to CEE. They compile the data and they run very comprehensive reports of charts, graphs, spider webs, all these different kinds of things. It gets sent back to the leader of the school or the district, plus our capacity builder who's assigned to that location. And then those 2 leaders and the capacity builder, they decide how they're going to roll out and bring that information back to the staff.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
This is just a quick question. On page 2, you have the instructional core focus visits, and we've started doing that. In fact, we had someone from Idaho to come in and work with us on that. Tell me, when you go to page 3, the on-site visits and interviews, you have an actual kind of instructional review visit for 6 schools based on the SIG requirements. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, and
Where can
it's
we get a copy of that?
Certainly, and so in the handout that has all the resources and whatever, I told my colleague Jody that I'm giving away her email address. So if you want a copy of those questions, and they're a work in progress, we use them and then we change them as we need to, if we need to improve upon them. But email her and she'd be happy to send you a copy. Jody Mills, yep.
Any other questions? We have about 2 or 3 minutes. Are there any questions for any of the presenters that you thought of or would like to ask at this time?
Yes, my name is Damon Brightful, again from Baltimore City Public Schools. Regarding the primary goal from the Idaho State Department of Education, what I guess compelled you all to not monitor compliance but effectiveness? What caused that?
That's a good question, and I wouldn't say that we don't monitor compliance. It's that we do it, we embed it, right? And part of that is our team is we're one of the smaller departments in the states, and that has the benefit of we've been able to learn a lot from our previous projects. So, for example, with Reading First, most of our team was the lead team on Reading First as well, and as well as some other things. So over time, we've seen that some of these things, when we say you must do X, Y, and Z, when failure happens, then we can take credit for that too, because we were the ones that told them to do it. And so over time, we've said, okay, this compliance to a set of specific requirements is all well and good, but you can still fail. And so that's where we as a team decided we need to change our mindset and say that's not good enough. We do have to do that because that's what our money is tied to. But it's not good enough. We have to set a higher bar and say, no, we're gonna shoot for this, and we're not gonna give up until we see that. I don't know if that helps in any way. I also thought about your earlier question about middle schools, and this tool is designed across the spectrum. So we use it in all of our school settings. It's actually pretty relative for middle schools.
This is it. You know, with the instructional review, those are taking about 3 to 4 days. Is that correct?
It
How are you
depends,
guys
yeah.
funding that at the state level if you have like 24 schools? How can you fund a team of 5 to 6 persons, 3 to 4 days a pop throughout the year? I'm just trying to figure out where you're getting your financing.
That's probably
'Cause
too complicated for me to answer in a snippet, so I'd be happy to chat with you more at the break.
Could you please?
Yeah,
Thanks.
sure.
Richard, Indiana. This is for Donna, actually. With your renewal checklist, did you? I don't know if you spoke about these 6 renewal points for your seeing which schools keep their money. Could you tell us those real quick? Is that possible?
And I probably wasn't clear enough on that. They're individual by school. Sometimes it's more broadly addressing issues at the district level, but it's things like a communication plan to ensure that all new stakeholders are included and understand what's been proposed in the plan. In some cases, it has to do with staffing changes, what will be done to ensure, first, there is a teacher in every classroom, certainly high quality, but first we have to get a teacher. That's been an issue in some schools, oddly enough, in the very rural areas. So it's kind of independently developed for each school. And I guess my point was that we just tried to focus on a few things rather than fix everything. We tried to help them focus on what would need to be addressed first, and then that will be their renewal plan.
All right, thank you. We're really actually exactly out of time. On the table, we put, there's at least one, maybe a couple of blue cards. I have some more here. If you want to, if you have a question separately that you wanted to ask and of the presenters, you can put it on there. If you get it to me, I'll see to it that I get it to them. I'll email them at least by the end of this week, or if not, hand it to them, depending on their length of the stay over the next couple of days. But much appreciative. We got in 18 questions, which is hopefully all recorded, and that tells me that you were a great audience and very attentive. And to the speakers, you did a great job, and thank you for your preparation. So.